What happened when an undercover CEO stepped into his own factory, only to find workers overworked, mistreated, and afraid to speak up. Instead of a well-run operation, he uncovered a toxic environment where fear dictated every shift. But when he finally revealed who he was, everything changed. One corrupt manager was exposed, and a broken system was forced to face reality. This is the story of a CEO who took matters into his own hands and proved that real leadership starts on the ground. Stay tuned, because this undercover mission is about to shake up everything. Nathan Reed had built his manufacturing empire from the ground up, transforming a small local plant into a nationwide chain. From his corporate office, everything appeared to be running smoothly. At least, that's what his managers assured him. But over the past year, complaints had begun piling up. Workers were quitting at an alarming rate, shipments were delayed, and customer satisfaction had plummeted. When Nathan demanded answers, his regional supervisors brushed it off, claiming it was just a phase. But he wasn't convinced. If something was wrong, he needed to see it for himself. So he made a decision. Disguising himself as a new factory worker named Nate, he arrived at one of his largest plants to uncover the truth. Dressed in an old work jacket, steel-toed boots, and a faded baseball cap, he blended in with the rest of the team. Nobody would suspect that the man standing beside them on the assembly line was actually their CEO. The moment he stepped onto the factory floor, the tension was palpable. The air was thick with the scent of hot metal and grease. Machines whirred loudly in the background, and workers moved in rigid, mechanical motions. There was no chatter, no laughter, just silent, tired faces. It didn't take long for Nathan to realize something was seriously wrong. As he adjusted to his new surroundings, his eyes landed on a young woman crouched near a conveyor belt, her shoulders shaking as she tried to stifle her sobs. His stomach tightened. He had expected to find issues, but this was something else entirely. And if this was just the first few minutes of his shift, he could only imagine what else was happening behind the scenes. Nathan barely had time to adjust to the factory floor's fast pace before witnessing his first sign of trouble. Near the conveyor belt, the young woman he had noticed earlier, her name tag reading Emily, was still crouched, her fingers gripping the edge of a metal cart as she tried to compose herself. Nathan hesitated, then took a step toward her. "Hey, you okay?" he asked, keeping his voice low. Emily flinched at the sound of his voice, quickly wiping her face with the sleeve of her uniform. "I'm fine," she muttered, standing up too quickly and nearly losing her balance. But Nathan could tell she was anything but fine. Before he could press further, a sharp voice cut through the factory noise. "Emily, I don't pay you to stand around and cry." Nathan turned just as a stocky, middle-aged man with a permanent scowl stomped toward them. His name tag read, Frank, floor supervisor. The way Emily shrank at the sound of his voice told Nathan everything he needed to know. This wasn't just an overworked employee having a bad day. This was someone who had been pushed to her breaking point. I'm getting back to work," Emily stammered, her voice small, but Frank had already shifted his glare toward Nathan. "You're the new guy, huh? Nate, right?" Frank didn't wait for an answer. "Well, Nate, unless you want your first shift to be your last, stop wasting time and start moving. We're behind schedule." Nathan forced himself to nod, keeping his expression neutral. He had barely been here 10 minutes, and he was already seeing a pattern. Fear, exhaustion, and a boss who ruled with intimidation rather than leadership. As he followed Emily to the next station, he took in his surroundings. To his right, an older worker, George, judging by his name tag, was struggling to lift a heavy metal panel onto the conveyor belt. He winced as he lifted it, his face tightening in pain. Nathan noticed how stiffly he moved, like his body had endured years of strain. The moment the panel slipped from George's grip and crashed to the floor, Frank was on him in an instant. "Damn it, George! If you can't handle the work, maybe you should retire already." Nathan's fists clenched, but he bit his tongue. He wanted to say something, to tell Frank off right then and there, but he needed more than a single outburst to justify action. He needed to see the full extent of the problem before making his move. As George gritted his teeth and bent down to lift the panel again, Nathan made a silent promise to himself. He wasn't just here to observe. He was here to fix this, no matter what it took. Nathan threw himself into the work, determined to blend in and experience the job just like the others. His first task was assembling metal components on the production line, a process that seemed simple at first but quickly became exhausting. The conveyor belt never slowed, forcing workers to move with military precision. If anyone hesitated even for a second, they fell behind. Within minutes, Nathan's arms ached from lifting and securing pieces into place. Sweat clung to his shirt, and the air smelled of burnt metal and machine grease. As he worked, he noticed the expressions of the workers around him, drained, distant, like people who had long since stopped expecting things to improve. Conversations were scarce, spoken in low, cautious voices. The unspoken rule was clear: work fast, don't complain, and avoid drawing attention to yourself. George, the older mechanic, moved stiffly as he repaired one of the machines near Nathan's station. Every time he bent down, he winced, pain written all over his face. Nathan kept glancing at him, waiting for someone to offer help, but no one did. It wasn't because they didn't care, it was because they knew better. Emily, still looking shaken from earlier, handed Nathan a set of parts. "You'll get used to it," she muttered, not meeting his eyes. "Or you won't." Before Nathan could respond, a loud thud echoed through the factory. Across the room, Danny, a younger worker in his early 20s, had dropped a stack of parts. His face turned pale as Frank appeared almost instantly. "What the hell was that?" Frank barked, marching toward him. Danny scrambled to pick up the pieces, his hands shaking. I just lost my grip. It won't happen again." Frank snorted. "Damn right it won't, because if it does, you're out of here." Nathan clenched his jaw, his frustration mounting. This wasn't just tough work, this was a pressure cooker, where mistakes weren't tolerated, injuries were ignored, and employees were treated like disposable machines. And this was just his first day. Something told him it was going to get even worse before he had enough evidence to make his move. The tension on the factory floor was suffocating, and Nathan could feel the weight of frustration and exhaustion pressing down on everyone. The relentless pace of work, the constant threat of reprimands, and the utter lack of basic respect had created an environment where fear ruled. He had seen enough to know things were bad, but it wasn't until the incident with the press machine that everything reached its breaking point. It happened in an instant. One of the hydraulic press machines malfunctioned, its gears grinding loudly before stalling mid-cycle. A worker, Lewis, a wiry man in his late 30s, was operating it at the time. As the machine jammed, he instinctively reached in to adjust the metal sheet, but just as he did, the press suddenly lurched back to life. He barely managed to yank his hand away before the steel plates came crashing down with a thunderous clang. The entire factory froze. Luis stood there, his chest heaving, his face pale. He had come inches from losing his hand. Nathan's stomach dropped as he watched, waiting for someone to step in. A manager? A safety inspector? Anyone? But instead, Frank stormed over, his expression twisted in irritation rather than concern. "What the hell do you think you're doing, Luis?" he snapped. "Are you trying to break the damn equipment?" Luis blinked, still in shock. "The machine jammed. I was just trying to fix it before it—" Frank cut him off with a harsh scoff. "Don't give me excuses. If you're too stupid to handle a machine, maybe you shouldn't be here at all." Nathan felt something snap inside him. He had spent the last few hours biting his tongue, trying to gather enough information before stepping in. But this wasn't just bad management. This was outright negligence. He took a step forward, his voice tight with anger. "Are you serious? He almost lost his hand because this machine wasn't properly maintained. And you're blaming him?" Frank turned, eyes narrowing at Nathan. "Oh, so now the new guy thinks he's got all the answers?" He let out a dry laugh. "Listen, rookie, you don't get how things work around here. You do your job, keep your mouth shut, and don't stick your nose where it doesn't belong." Nathan stared at him down, his heart pounding. He had planned to stay undercover a little longer, but at this moment, he knew it was time to end the charade. Straightening his posture, he exhaled slowly and prepared to reveal exactly who he was. Nathan didn't hesitate. He had seen enough. Taking a slow breath, he straightened his posture and looked Frank dead in the eye. The room had gone silent, workers frozen mid-tack, all eyes shifting between him and their aggressive supervisor. You want to talk about how things work around here? Nathan said, his voice calm but firm. He reached up, grabbed his name tag, and ripped it from his shirt, letting it drop onto a nearby work table. Because I think it's time I explain exactly who I am. Frank frowned, his scowl deepening. What the hell are you talking about? Nathan took a deliberate step forward. My name isn't Nate. He let the moment stretch just long enough for the weight of his words to sink in. I'm Nathan Reed. I own this company. The effect was immediate. A ripple of shock spread through the workers. Emily's eyes widened, her hands gripping the edge of a metal cart. George let out a slow breath, realization dawning. Even Danny, who had kept his head down most of the shift, glanced up, his expression caught between disbelief and hope. Frank, however, staggered back as if he had been punched. His mouth opened, then closed, his bravado crumbling. You're lying, he sputtered, though the doubt was already creeping into his voice. Nathan tilted his head slightly. You really want to test that theory? Frank's throat bobbed as he swallowed hard. He looked around, searching for support, but found none. The very workers he had bullied for months, years even, were now standing in quiet solidarity behind Nathan. His authority was gone. Nathan took another step forward, his voice steady but edged with controlled fury. I came here undercover because I wanted to see for myself what was happening in my factories. I wanted to know if the complaints I'd been hearing were true, and now, after everything I've seen today, I don't need any more proof. His eyes locked on to Frank. You are the problem, and as of this moment, you're done here. Frank's face twisted in panic. Wait! I was just keeping people in line, making sure they worked hard. You think this place runs itself? Nathan shook his head. I think this place has been running on fear for far too long. And that ends today. Turning to Emily, he gave a single nod. Call security, have him escorted out. For a moment, Frank stood frozen. Then, as security arrived, he let out a low curse and stormed toward the exit. No one spoke. No one stopped him. And as the factory door slammed shut behind him, the entire floor seemed to exhale at once. The tyrant was gone. Nathan turned back to face the workers, his gaze sweeping over the silent crowd. Some still looked shocked, others skeptical, but there was one emotion he hadn't seen before. Hope. He knew words alone wouldn't be enough to earn their trust. They had heard promises before, only to be let down. If he wanted to fix this, he had to start proving it now. I know what you're all thinking, he began, his voice steady but sincere. You're wondering if this is just another speech, another temporary fix. I won't blame you for doubting me. What I saw today shouldn't have happened in any workplace. Not under my name, not in my company. He exhaled, running a hand through his hair before continuing. That changes now. Effective immediately, this factory is getting an overhaul. That means fair scheduling, enforced breaks, and proper safety inspections. No more outdated machines putting lives at risk. His eyes flicked to Luis, the worker who had almost lost his hand. That incident shouldn't have happened. From now on, all equipment will be properly maintained, and no one will be forced to risk injury just to get the job done. Nathan then turned to George, the older mechanic who had been suffering in silence. Injured workers will no longer be ignored. If you need time to recover, you'll get it, without fear of losing your job. Murmurs spread through the group. A few heads nodded, a few shoulders loosened, but Emily crossed her arms, eyes narrowed. And what about Frank? He's gone, sure, but what stops the next guy from doing the same thing? Nathan met her gaze, appreciating her bluntness. I'm not just replacing Frank. I'm changing the system. I'll be hiring a new plant manager, someone who actually values the people who work here. And from this point forward, we're setting up an anonymous reporting system, so if anyone tries to pull the same stunts, I'll know about it before it gets this bad again. He let his words settle. He wasn't asking them to trust him immediately. Trust had to be earned, step by step. For now, let's get back to work, he said. But know this, things are going to be different, and this time it's not just talk. And for the first time all day, the factory didn't feel quite as heavy as before. Nathan knew that firing Frank and making promises was just the beginning. Real change wasn't about a single decision, it was about long-term commitment, and that meant following through on everything he had said. As the factory floor buzzed with cautious energy, he stepped forward again, making one final announcement. "This isn't just about this one factory," Nathan said, his voice carrying across the room. "If this has been happening here, it's probably happening elsewhere. That's why, starting today, I'll be personally auditing every single plant in this company. I won't be relying on reports or filtered updates from managers. I'll be speaking directly to employees, just like I did here." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some workers exchanged glances, still skeptical, but others looked genuinely hopeful. Nathan continued, his tone firm. "I'm also reviewing wages. Anyone who has been underpaid for too long will finally get the raises they deserve. Overtime will be properly compensated. No more pressure to stay late without pay. And from now on, every worker will have a direct communication line to upper management. If you have a problem, you won't have to suffer in silence." Across the room, Nathan saw George standing near a workstation, rubbing his sore back. He walked over and met the older man's gaze. "You're going to get the medical attention you need," Nathan said, lowering his voice. "And if you need time off, you'll get it. No more pushing through pain just to keep your job." George studied him for a long moment, then gave a small, slow nod. It wasn't trust, yet, but it was the first step toward it. Emily folded her arms, still skeptical. "We've heard big promises before," she said. "How do we know you won't forget all this once you leave?" Nathan didn't flinch. "Because I don't plan on leaving," he answered. "I'll be back, and I expect you all to hold me accountable." Silence hung in the air, thick with the weight of everything that had happened. But for the first time, it wasn't just frustration and exhaustion that filled the space. It was hope. Nathan turned to the factory as a whole. This was just one step, but it was a start, and for the first time in years, the workers weren't just looking at their CEO as a distant figure. They were looking at someone who finally saw them. Nathan lingered on the factory floor for a while, watching as the workers slowly resumed their tasks. The difference was subtle but undeniable. The weight of fear had begun to lift. People still moved cautiously, but there was something new in the air, a sense of possibility. He knew it would take time before they truly believed things would change, but for the first time, there was a reason to hope. As he walked toward the exit, Danny jogged up beside him, wiping sweat from his forehead. "So, what happens next?" the young worker asked, his voice edged with uncertainty. Nathan stopped, looking around at the factory, the people, the machines, the long hours they had endured without a voice. "Next?" he repeated, crossing his arms. "I make sure this isn't just a temporary fix?" Danny nodded slowly, as if weighing his words. "We'll hold you to that." Nathan gave him a small smile. "Good. I expect you to." He passed by Emily, who had spent most of the shift skeptical of his promises. She still looked unconvinced, arms crossed as she watched him with a raised brow. "You're really going to follow through?" she asked, not bothering to mask her doubt. Nathan met her gaze without hesitation. "I have to. Otherwise everything I just did was meaningless." She studied him for a moment longer, then shrugged. "We'll see." That was the best response he could have hoped for. He didn't expect trust overnight. He had spent years unknowingly allowing this system to deteriorate, and a single day wouldn't fix it. But step by step, he would prove himself. Outside, George was waiting near the loading dock, stretching his back carefully. Nathan approached him, lowering his voice. "I meant what I said. You'll get proper medical leave, and you won't have to worry about your job." George nodded, though there was still hesitation in his eyes. "I'll believe it when I see it." Nathan extended his hand. "Then I'll make sure you see it." After a beat, George shook his hand. As Nathan walked to his car, he let out a slow breath. This was only the beginning. He had 14 more factories to visit, more employees to speak to, and more damage to undo. For years, he had run his company from the top, trusting reports and numbers instead of the people who actually kept his business alive. That would never happen again. He had started this journey as an undercover worker. Now, he would return as a real leader. The story of Nathan Reed highlights a powerful lesson in leadership, accountability, and the importance of listening to employees. As a CEO, Nathan had relied on reports and middle management to oversee his business, assuming that things were running smoothly. However, by stepping onto the factory floor and experiencing the daily struggles of his workers firsthand, he learned that numbers on a spreadsheet don't tell the full story, people do. One of the key takeaways is that true leadership requires direct involvement. Nathan's managers assured him that everything was fine, but in reality, workers were being overworked, mistreated, and ignored. By going undercover, he uncovered the truth and took responsibility for fixing it. Another lesson is that change isn't about words, it's about actions. The workers had heard empty promises before, and trust couldn't be rebuilt overnight. Nathan understood that earning their trust required consistent follow-through. Finally, the story emphasizes that a company's success is directly tied to how it treats its employees. Toxic leadership doesn't just hurt workers, it affects productivity, morale, and ultimately, the business itself. By prioritizing fairness, safety, and communication, Nathan set a new standard for what leadership should be.